It had been 4 years since I moved to the United States, and never once had I come across a man like him. Thin in appearance, but powerful in presence, there was something magnetic about his existence. Something that set him apart from the other men I had known. When he offered to spend the night with me, I didn't hesitate. I had shared nights with stronger, richer men before, but this one, he felt different. Something about his aura, his eyes, the way he said my name. It pulled me in like gravity. I followed him to his apartment, and it was there that I realized how deceptive appearances could be. He was stronger than he looked, physically and emotionally. There was a storm inside him that didn't rage but radiated power. For the first time in years, I had encountered a Pakistani man in America. His personality wasn't like the others. He didn't carry arrogance or lust in his eyes. Instead, he looked like someone raised with values, with a quiet dignity. That gentleness made me pause. For a girl like me, raised in poverty, discarded by her father, raised solely by a struggling mother, that kind of presence was rare. My life began in a narrow alley of a forgotten town. My father abandoned us when I was too young to remember his face. My mother raised me with all the strength a single woman could muster. She worked tirelessly in people's homes, cooking and cleaning, just to feed me. Yet she never let me work. Not once did she allow the world to see me as a servant. She raised me with dignity, shielding me from the cruelty she endured. But poverty is a cruel master. Just as I turned 18, I discovered that my mother had developed a severe lung disease. Her health deteriorated by the day, though she tried to hide her pain. I watched her smile through the suffering, tearing pieces of bread with her trembling hands, feeding me with a strength I couldn't comprehend. She never let me feel like a burden, even as she lay coughing in bed, her body wasting away. By the time I turned 19, she could no longer stand. Her body had given up. We had no savings, no family support, and no neighbors willing to help. Desperate, I turned to the landlord of our village, a man feared more than respected. He agreed to lend me money, but only on interest. I accepted his terms without argument. My mother's life meant more to me than the price I would pay. The next morning, I took her to the city's largest hospital, the only one equipped for lung treatment. Treatment began immediately, but money vanished quickly. Half went to the hospital and half to food. For 3 days, I lived in those hospital corridors, praying silently. But on the fourth day, everything changed. My mother's body turned cold. Her eyes stopped blinking. I screamed for help, but I already knew. She was slipping away. The moment the doctors confirmed my mother's condition was irreversible, something inside me collapsed. I stood there, frozen, as the nurse pulled a white sheet over her lifeless body. Her eyes, once full of fire and sacrifice, now stared silently toward the ceiling as if still searching for something. Maybe for me. Maybe for the man who had abandoned her. Maybe for peace. I leaned over and kissed her cold forehead, whispering a promise I wasn't even sure I could keep, that I would survive. That her death wouldn't be the end of me. I carried her back to our village alone. No relatives, no friends, just one man behind me, the driver, and the dead weight of a body that once held my whole world. The landlord, Chaudhry, arranged the burial, maybe out of pity, maybe because he knew what I owed him. Once the funeral ended and everyone returned to their lives, I found myself alone in that crumbling one-room house, staring at the ceiling, waiting for grief to kill me. But grief doesn't kill. It sits beside you and watches. That night I lay curled in the corner, hunger twisting in my stomach, but my mind only echoed one sound, the ticking of time, counting down to when Chaudhry would come to collect. I had borrowed the money with one promise, to repay it in 4 months. If I failed, the debt would double. At the time, I believed my mother would recover, get back on her feet, and return to work. I never imagined she would leave me like this, empty-handed, without guidance or defense. 3 weeks passed. I hadn't eaten properly. I sold the last of our belongings, cheap brass utensils, an old radio, a pair of bangles I had saved from my childhood. Still, it wasn't enough to pay him back. I prayed, desperately, secretly, that maybe someone would come for me, someone from my father's side, some long-lost uncle, but no one did. No one ever came. Then one evening, there was a knock at the door. Startled, I pulled the curtain aside and saw one of Chaudhry's men standing outside. His face was blank, unreadable. "He's calling you," he said simply. My heart sank. I tried to make excuses. said I was unwell, that I'd visit tomorrow, but the man didn't budge. He waited at the door until I gave in and followed him. My legs felt heavy, as if every step was leading me closer to something irreversible. When I arrived at Chaudhry's estate, he was seated on a large cushioned chair, sipping hookah, looking completely at ease. His eyes fell on me with quiet amusement. "Would you work at my house?" he asked. "You'll have food, a place to sleep, and I'll cancel the interest on your debt." His words were silk wrapped around thorns. I had no choice. I nodded. He smiled, gestured to a servant. "Take her home. She starts tomorrow." And just like that, I walked toward a new house, one that looked like a palace but felt like a prison. The mansion loomed like a palace against the darkening sky. Ornate gates, marble steps, golden chandeliers. I had never seen wealth like this up close. The servant who brought me here didn't speak much. He showed me to a side entrance, led me past the kitchen, and handed me off to a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as the housekeeper. "You'll help clean the guest rooms," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Start tomorrow. Tonight, you'll sleep in the storage room. Don't wander." I nodded, not out of obedience, but numbness. That night, I lay awake on a mattress that smelled of mothballs and forgotten things. The room had no windows, only one dusty bulb that flickered now and then. I thought about my mother, about debt, about how far I had already drifted from the girl I used to be. But even then, I hadn't sensed how much further I would fall. The next morning, I rose early and followed the housekeeper's directions. My first task was to sweep the large upstairs rooms filled with velvet curtains, silk cushions, and furniture too expensive to touch. I entered one of the bedrooms slowly, pushing the heavy door open with effort. It smelled of foreign cologne and stale air. As I bent down to pick up a fallen cushion, I felt it, the weight of someone's presence behind me. I turned and saw him. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with sharp eyes and slicked back hair. Thin like his father, but taller, more aggressive in posture. This was Chaudhry's son, the one who had returned from America. I had heard about him in hushed gossip from the staff. His wife and children still lived abroad. He had come alone, perhaps to rest, perhaps to escape something, but there was nothing restful in his gaze. I moved to leave the room, but he stepped into my path. "Where are you going?" he asked, smiling faintly. "I was just cleaning," I said softly, trying not to meet his eyes. He reached out, at first just to touch my arm, but his grip tightened. I tried to pull away. "Please let me go," I whispered. He didn't. Before I could scream, he slammed the door shut and locked it. The sound of the bolt clicking echoed like a verdict. I stumbled backward, but he was faster. In seconds, I was thrown onto the bed. I fought. I used everything my body could offer, but he was stronger, crueler, practiced. He tore at my clothes like a wolf and crushed my voice beneath his hands. When it was over, he stood calmly, fixing his shirt as if nothing had happened. Then he held up a small phone. He had recorded everything. "Say a word," he said, and everyone will see who you really are." I lay there, bleeding, shattered, silenced. The room was still, but inside me something had died. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't eat, I didn't speak. My body ached, but my soul hurt more. The housekeeper noticed my bruises and swollen face, but chose silence. Maybe she had seen it before. Maybe she knew the price of asking questions. In that mansion, pain was just another quiet guest. He didn't stop. Every night he called me to his room, demanding obedience with threats. "If you disobey," he whispered coldly, "I'll send your video to every man in the village. They'll never see you the same again." And so I obeyed, not out of weakness, but out of fear. Fear of being destroyed, not just in body, but in reputation, memory, and name. Days blurred into weeks. I was no longer the girl who wept. I became numb, cold, a puppet with strings too tight to break. Until one evening, I overheard him on the phone, laughing with someone. "Yes, my visa's ready. I'm flying next week," he said. My heart fluttered, not with hope, but with panic. Was he leaving me behind, or worse, would he leave and still destroy me from afar? But fate was not so kind. A day later, he entered my room with a smile. "You're coming with me," he said. My wife needs a maid in America. I told the embassy your family's staff. His voice was coated with false kindness, like poison and sugar. I stared at him in disbelief. He had arranged a visa for me without asking, without even telling me. I was no longer a person. I was property. Within days, we were on a flight. It was my first time leaving Pakistan. As the plane soared into the clouds, I stared down at the land that had both raised and ruined me. Part of me wished the plane would crash, but it didn't, and neither did my fate. When we landed in America, the air felt different, colder, stranger. The streets were clean, the buildings tall, and the women wore clothes that left little to imagination. I felt like a ghost in a land that didn't speak my language, didn't share my shame, didn't care about my past. But the nightmare wasn't over. He rented a small apartment and told me to keep quiet. Don't talk to anyone, Saad, he warned. You're here because I allow it. At first, he continued using me the same way he had in Pakistan, but now he was bolder, more reckless. There were no servants, no family members to hide from, just walls, shadows, and screams no one could hear. Soon, he began taking me to clubs, loud music, flashing lights, women dancing in clothes so small they felt like decorations, not garments. I stood in a corner, trying not to breathe. Wear this, he said, handing me a dress I couldn't even call clothing. Smile, look alive, you'll attract more that way. I refused. He slapped me. Remember, he hissed, you belong to me. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a new beginning. It was a deeper prison. In the weeks that followed, I lost count of how many nights I stood half naked under flickering lights, surrounded by strangers. He dressed me in revealing clothes, painted my lips red, and whispered lies into my ears. It's just dancing, he said. You're lucky to be here. But I wasn't dancing, I was decaying. Every song, every drink, every man's gaze chipped away at who I once was. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. The girl who once cried over her mother's cold body was gone. What remained was a shell, obedient, hollow, afraid. Then, one night, it happened. He came home drunk and euphoric, threw his jacket across the room and said, "You're finally useful." I stared at him, not understanding. He sat down, lit a cigarette, and smiled as if he'd won something. "There's a man," he said, a white man. He's rich, wants a taste of something exotic." You. My breath caught in my throat. I shook my head. I know, I won't. But before I could finish, he pulled out his phone. "Should I remind you?" he asked, waving the video he'd recorded that night back in Pakistan. And just like that, the silence returned. He took me to an upscale apartment the next night. The man was older, his eyes cold, his smile hungrier than I'd ever seen. I was handed over like an object, no more valuable than the cash exchanged for me. The door closed behind me and my fate was sealed. That night, I was broken all over again. The man wasn't just cruel, he was calculated. He didn't see me as human. I was an experience, a thrill, something temporary and disposable. I don't remember how long I lay there afterwards, staring at the ceiling. But when I returned to the apartment the next day, I felt different. Not weaker, not stronger. Just more distant from the world. He didn't stop there. One man turned into two, then three. Sometimes he'd send me to different men on different nights, like a parcel dropped at doorsteps. My name vanished. My voice disappeared. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a product. At some point, I stopped crying. When pain becomes routine, the body learns to forget. I no longer begged him to stop. I no longer pleaded for freedom. Instead, I started drinking. I picked up cigarettes. I made friends with other girls in the club who wore pain like perfume. Together, we laughed at things we didn't find funny. We lived like ghosts in a world that couldn't see us. And slowly, I started to change. Flirting became easier. Dancing became mechanical. Men touching me didn't make me flinch anymore. Not because I liked it, but because I had learned how not to feel. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't care where I slept. All I knew was survival. And somehow, even that felt like giving up. By now, I didn't measure life in days or nights. I measured it in men, in music beats, in the number of drinks it took to blur the world. I had become efficient at what was expected of me, seducing, dancing, obeying. My body moved like it had memorized the steps. The shame that once clung to me like a second skin had peeled away. Or maybe it had sunk so deep I couldn't feel it anymore. I became bold, loud, even flirtatious. I laughed at men's jokes, touched their arms, whispered things they wanted to hear. I watched them fall for the fantasy they thought I was. They didn't know that the real me had died long ago. I was no longer mourning her. I started making friends, girls like me, girls with broken pasts and empty futures. We smoked together behind the club. We shared lipstick and secrets. We gave each other nicknames, danced for tips, and clung to whatever high came our way. Pain had become background noise, like the bass of the music thumping through our veins. Then one night, something strange happened. I was outside the club, leaning against a wall, dragging on a cigarette I didn't even enjoy. A group of drunk men walked by, laughing loudly, making crude comments. I was used to it. I threw a flirty glance at them, automatic, detached, until my eyes landed on someone who didn't look like the others. He stood a little apart, clean-cut, slim, dressed modestly. He looked foreign. No, not foreign, familiar. Something about him screamed home. Our eyes met for a brief second. Out of instinct, I blew him a flying kiss, expecting the usual reaction, a smirk, a wink, a whistle. Instead, he simply looked at me. Not in lust, not in judgment, just looked, like he saw something buried underneath. He walked over slowly, hesitantly. I rolled my eyes, already preparing for another meaningless conversation. But his first words stopped me. "You shouldn't be here." I blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "This place doesn't deserve someone like you." I laughed bitterly. "Someone like me?" "You're Pakistani, aren't you?" he asked gently. "It's written all over your face." I hadn't heard that word in so long, Pakistani. It felt foreign on my skin, like a name I used to answer to in a past life. "What's it to you?" I snapped, unsure why his softness made me angry. He smiled faintly. "Nothing, just it hurts to see someone from home lost like this." For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. A crack in the numbness. I didn't know his name. I didn't even care. But something about him haunted me. He didn't ask for my number. He didn't touch me. He just nodded politely and walked away, leaving me standing there with a cigarette burning down between my fingers. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wanted to be seen again. I didn't see him for several days after that first encounter, but his voice lingered. The way he looked at me, not with hunger or pity, but with recognition, left a mark. I had grown used to being stared at like a commodity, a fantasy, a mistake. But he had looked at me like a name, a human being, and that haunted me more than any bruise on my skin. A week later, he returned to the club. He didn't come to drink. He stood outside as if unsure whether to go in. I spotted him across the street, leaning against a lamppost, pretending to scroll through his phone. My heart skipped. Not out of romance, but out of something deeper. Something I hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, hope. I walked over, trying to mask the trembling in my legs. "You followed me?" I asked. He smiled softly. "No," I waited. His name was Shehryar. He had been living in America for 2 years, studying, working part-time, trying to build a future. He didn't drink. He didn't party. And yet here he was, drawn to someone like me. Over the next few weeks, we began to meet outside the club. At first, I wore my usual makeup, short skirts, and loud perfume, but slowly, I began dressing differently. Jeans, a scarf, less eyeliner. I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it because, around him, I didn't need to perform. We sat in coffee shops, walked quietly in parks, talked about food and home and people we missed. He asked about my past, but never pushed. I wanted to tell him, but the truth sat in my throat like acid. Still, something in his gentleness made me believe that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't run away. Then came the night I invited him to my apartment. I expected him to touch me, to ask for something. All men eventually did. But instead, he stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking at the books on my dusty shelf. "I need to tell you something," I said, barely audible. He turned to me, not interrupting. And so I told him. Everything. From my mother's death, to Chaudhry, to the blackmail, the flights, the sales, the shame. My voice cracked more than once, my hands shook. I couldn't meet his eyes. When I finished, the silence felt unbearable. I waited for him to stand up, to leave, to call me names I already whispered to myself. But he didn't. Instead, he came closer, sat beside me, and said, "None of that changes what I see when I look at you." I looked up, eyes wide. I see someone who wants to live. In that moment, the dam broke. I cried, not the quiet tears of hopelessness, but the trembling, gasping sobs of someone being pulled out of drowning. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel used. I felt chosen. After that night, something inside me shifted. I stopped returning to the club. I threw out every short dress, every bottle of perfume that reminded me of survival in the shadows. I quit smoking. The bitter taste of liquor no longer dulled my pain. It reminded me of who I never wanted to be again. Shahryar didn't demand anything. He simply stood beside me as I tried, one step at a time, to rebuild what I had lost. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of how far I had already come. When I broke down, he didn't tell me to be strong. He simply let me fall apart and stayed. One day, he sat across from me in silence, then finally spoke. "I want to take you home," he said, "to my family. I want them to meet you." I froze. What if they don't accept me? "They will," he said without hesitation. "They'll see what I see." I wanted to believe him, but a voice in my head whispered otherwise. How could any family welcome a woman like me? Still, he was unwavering. He promised me a future, not of luxury, but of dignity. And so I agreed. The day we arrived at his home, I was wrapped in modest clothes, my heart pounding beneath every thread. The house was warm, quiet. I followed him through the hallway to a spacious sitting room. A man sat behind a newspaper, legs crossed, face hidden. The scent of fresh tea filled the air. "That's my father," Shahryar whispered. The man lowered his paper slowly. My eyes locked onto his face, and something inside me cracked. There was a mark on his neck, a small, deep scar just below his collarbone. My breath caught. I had seen that scar before, in a memory, in a whisper. My mother had told me about it on her deathbed. "If he ever comes to find you," she had said, "you'll know him by the mark on his neck." I stared, stunned. Could this man, Shahryar's father, be my father too? Trembling, I stepped forward. "Do you know a woman named Zora?" I asked, voice shaking. He looked startled. "Why?" "She was my mother," I said. "You left her, years ago, in a village, with a daughter." He went pale. The room fell silent. Shahryar turned slowly toward his father, confusion shadowing his face. I continued, my voice breaking. "I am that daughter." "No," he said finally, standing up. "This can't be. You shouldn't be here." "She's my sister?" Shahryar whispered. His father turned away. "Leave," he muttered. "My wife can never know. You're not part of this family." I couldn't breathe. The floor beneath me seemed to vanish. The man I loved was my half-brother. The man who saved me could never be mine. And the man who created me denied me. Again. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was frozen, thick with truths that could no longer be buried. I looked at him, my father, not as a daughter yearning for love, but as a woman staring into the face of the man who had ruined everything. He hadn't just abandoned my mother. He had sentenced us both to a life of humiliation, grief, and pain, and now, after all these years, when fate gave him the chance to make it right, he turned away again. I expected Shahryar to speak, but he didn't. He stood there, frozen, his face pale, his breath shallow. The truth had crushed him. The man he had admired all his life had destroyed the woman he tried to save. I turned to him. "You didn't know," I said gently. "This isn't your fault." He shook his head, backing away, ashamed. "But I brought you here." To him. "No," I whispered. "You brought me to the truth." I walked toward the door. My hands trembled, but my steps were steady. Before leaving, I looked at my father one last time. "Do you remember the woman you left behind? She died with your name on her lips. Her only wish was that I find you, live with you, be safe." His face twitched. Regret finally cracked through his pride. "I was young," he said. "I didn't know." "You knew," I cut in, firm but calm. "You just didn't care." The room fell silent again. Then I said what I had carried for years. "I will never forgive you. Not because I hate you, but because my mother deserved more than what you gave her. And I deserved a father, not a stranger hiding behind a newspaper." I turned and left. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for tears or apologies. Some doors aren't meant to be reopened. Shahryar followed me outside. His eyes were glassy. "Where will you go?" "I'm not sure," I said. "But I know where I won't go. I won't return to the clubs. I won't return to the nights filled with strangers. I won't return to the woman I was forced to become." He reached for my hand, but I gently pulled away. "You were my miracle," I whispered. "But miracles aren't always meant to stay. Thank you for showing me who I still am." He nodded, saying nothing. I took a bus the next morning, not back to the city, but to my mother's grave. I sat beside it for hours, speaking every truth I had never said out loud. I told her I had seen the man she once loved. I told her he never changed. I told her I had forgiven myself. Then I stood up, brushed the dust off my clothes, and walked away. Not as a victim, not as a daughter, but as a woman reborn, and for the first time in my life, I was truly, deeply free.